Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Medicamentum Authentica. I'm Dr. Andrew Kaufman, and I have a returning guest today, Dr. Barre Lando, who I think you all enjoyed our previous discussion when we talked a lot about wave mechanics and electromagnetic theory and how it affects health. And we also talked about terrain theory and pleomorphism. But of course, there are other topics, yet more expertise that Bear has to share with us. So I was eager to bring him back today and talk about some more topics. So it's great to have you back with us, Bear.
Thanks, honored to be here, and I look forward to this. Always a delight to talk to you, Andrew.
Oh, thanks so much. And Bear, you're out there in Northern California, in a remote area, and you really are currently pretty much self-sufficient, or at least you have the capability to be completely self-sufficient. So that's something that I'm really looking into and planning to get property as soon as possible. That can be off-grid and sustain a small community of people, and a lot of people are making that move, as our societies go the opposite direction. So I'm really excited to get your take on what's required for this. How do you set it up? What it's like living that way? And so why don't you just start us off?
Sure. Well, we're barely in California. We're right on the border of Oregon. We're up in the northwest corner, and we're right on a beautiful river called the Smith River. And my partner's on the main fork. It takes about an hour to drive to his place. And we're on a very remote South Fork, which is a very hard to, navigate canyon road up the South Fork. The South Fork of the Smith River is considered one of the cleanest rivers in the nation. Right now, we've got steelhead and salmon running, and wildlife is very abundant. It's really untouched. There's this little corner up here that if you go north a few hours to Portland, you're in a big metropolitan center, and then the Bay Area. But it's about 6 hours to Portland and about 8 hours down to the Bay Area. So we're in this little untouched region that, because of the ruggedness and the confluence of several mountain ranges and all the rivers in the area, it denies any kind of development, which we're happy about. So our closest town is about an hour and a half away. And we pretty much make do for ourselves. We're completely on solar power. Solar power is sort of a mixed bag. It's great because it allows you to be independent. But, in other circles that I'm working with, we're already looking at the next generation of energy production that, will be much more efficient and much more elegant, we'll say, than solar power. But right now it serves our needs. We pump river water, into holding tanks. We have several springs on the property that we also get water from. And, pretty much we've carved out a little permaculture farm because, we did certified permaculture design and has been studying for decades in biodynamic farming. And so all of those things, in our past experience of living off grid in other locations in Hawaii and other places in Northern California, have allowed us to culminate a much larger vision in our present farm here.
Right. And when you say permaculture, you're talking about essentially a way to sustain yourself without relying on outside resources in terms of cultivating agriculture.
Well, that's part of it, but there are a lot of permaculture farms and permaculturists that operate closer to urban centers where they do use on-grid services. Permaculture is really more about taking a piece of land and intelligently designing it so that not only do you get maximum efficiency, as far as whatever you're trying to farm or produce, but simultaneously you're building new topsoil for new generations. You're not using up resources, you're actually creating resources while you're servicing your own needs. We do add the extra off-grid element to our operation just because of our location. And biodynamic farming is really more about on the ground, hands in the soil techniques that really augment greatly beyond the confines of, say, permaculture design.
Right. And that's what has come out of the anthroposophical movement.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Okay. So I've learned a little bit about that in the past. And so we're really talking about, making good use of the land and making it in a way that you're not stripping out all the nutrients like they do in modern agricultural practices. So you're going to have healthier food, and then you're going to be able to grow year after year to meet all your needs. So this is the kind of thing, right, that is really important if you have a piece of land and you're trying to, design it. How can it, sustain my family and me, and or a group of families who are cooperating, on that kind of a venture. And because, as you point out, right, this has been done in urban areas with very small pieces of land. So you don't really need a lot of land to do this. Is that like, how do you have some numbers, like how much, per person or per family you might need to comfortably grow enough food and to sustain yourself?
There's I'll answer that kind of indirectly. There's a family in Southern California, in the San Diego or Anaheim area, I believe. And you may be familiar with them. They have a website, and they have a little postage size piece of land with their house in a completely suburban area. And they've transformed it into an oasis where not only do they have their family and extended family living in this small house, and it's on YouTube, you can see it, and I'd encourage anybody to go look at it. It's remarkable. So they're providing for themselves. There's probably about 10 people living there, but they also provide for farmers markets. They are selling their wares online. They just do incredible things. They have animals, they have plants, they have it's the ultimate in intelligent permaculture design in a tiny, tiny space. So I guess the answer, yeah, it doesn't take much room at all. You can have a townhouse with a patio, and with what I know how to do, you could feed yourself remarkably well just on that little spot there if you know what you're doing.
Wow, that's really incredible. So for the people out there who, are thinking about doing this, it must take great comfort in realizing that you don't actually need a big, huge piece of land. But what about, the animals? Don't they need more space? You mentioned even in this, right, family in California that they had animals in there. So how does that work?
Well, they have chickens, they have goats, they have other, I think rabbits and other mammals there as well, just all intelligently in their own little spaces, all contributing, their resources in the form of manure and things that, then go right into planting. And so they're doing it on a very small space. In fact, they have more animals than we have. We have acreage up here,
Right.
and they have more animals than we have. Part of biodynamics is to have animals on the land, providing for a lot of those, elements, so you don't have to buy fertilizer and everything. Now, even though we don't raise a lot of animals, we have chickens and small animals, but we don't have herds of cattle and things that would, plod the land and, do kind of natural grooming of the land and prepare it for planting. But we live in an area where we have neighbors that have horses and cattle, and so we have a modified biodynamic operation where all I have to do is, drive up the dirt road and fill up my truck with horse manure that's, from animals that have never been tainted with antibiotics and hormones and things. So we're a little bit more creative that way, because our main focus is medicinal herbs plus food that we, do more for ourselves.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. And, it might be surprising for some people to learn that actually, animal manure really makes a huge difference with growing, right? If you try to use chemical fertilizers, it's not going to be the same experience, right?
Yeah.
And you use
Well,
the fresh manure.
yeah, but it has to age, otherwise it's going to be too hot. And, it would surprise people, but a lot of the organic food that we buy that's, guaranteed only organic fertilizers, it isn't that great. And when you test that food, like for instance, if you were to go to one of these major chain stores, we won't mention any names, and buy their organic produce, it has perhaps, if you're lucky, a third of the nutrition that produce used to have, oh, say 100 years ago.
Right.
And another thing that people don't understand is if you have even good, clean organic food that's devoid of the nutritional content, it doesn't have that nutrient density, it actually becomes toxic because your body needs those elements in order to process it. And if they're not available in abundance, then you get into problems with incomplete digestion. It goes into all the gut problems that people talk about these
Right.
days.
So do you have like I know obviously trace minerals is one of the things that gets depleted from food grown that way, but what are some of the other nutrients that would be deficient from food grown in that respect?
Well, this gets into a whole different topic. I'll mention another just remarkable man that lived not that long ago. His name was Kerry Reams. He would be considered like the Tesla for agriculture, and way ahead of his time. And I've been a student of his work for many, many years. And he understood what we understand in medicine, that our systems are electrical primarily. So when I do soil testing, I use a process called ionization analysis, which was his brainchild, that I actually use for medicine and for soil testing. And so what I do is I take a biochemical assay of the soil, and I take many samples around the land because one sample won't do it. For instance, if you do soil testing and send it into a prominent lab, and maybe if you take several samples, they're going to conglomerate it all. They aren't going to do it right. You have to have a weak acid solution in order to draw the chemical elements out, because that's what plants actually secrete themselves in order to absorb things. And so it really, the way they do it doesn't give you a true accounting of what the plants need.
Right.
So with ionization analysis, you can do that. But then when you take these biochemical elements out of the soil, then you put it in an equation that gives us what we call the line of resistance. And what you want is a certain line of resistance, which pertains more to the soil electrical vectors. And when you know how to do that, you don't end up putting in even the fraction of the amount of organic fertilizers that somebody would need if they're doing organic farming. You know how to target certain things like, calcium, phosphorus, or whatever short, but not so much to supply things from a biochemical perspective, but in order to tweak the electricity so that what you're doing is constantly moving the compatibility between the electrical vectors of the soil and the plant rootlets. And when that compatibility comes closer, then you have an enormously more efficient uptake of nutrition without using a fraction of the fertilizers, organic or otherwise, in the process.
Wow. No, so is this in like the background of the Earth's magnetic field that these vectors are aligned, or what's the driving force behind? It seems like you're saying that because of various electrolytes present in the soil, right, that may conduct electrical energy, that it can disrupt the flow through the soil, right, which was not optimal for the plant growth, right?
Precisely. Yeah, and it's not about quantity. And then, of course, when you put in even good organic fertilizers in the soil in abundance without really acknowledging or having any awareness about the electrical properties of the soil, you're destroying topsoil in the process, because topsoil is produced in conjunction with plant life, and that compatibility
Right.
really has to exist. Otherwise, you're just using things up and creating more imbalances in the process. So we really like to think, the old saying, 7 generations in advance. We're not just concerned about growing good herbs for ourselves here and now, but we want our grandchildren to be able to do the same and have, things improve over the generations rather than just burning
Right.
out every place that you farm.
This it reminds me of cooking, like, like let's say making a tomato sauce, right? Like, so you put all your initial ingredients and it simmers for hours and then you taste it, right? And you're like, well, what is that seasoning it needs more of, right? If you just take all the seasonings and add a bit of everything, which is like putting down the fertilizer, right? It's not going to taste right, right? You overdo some things, right? It'll be out of balance. But you got to find, is it basil that it needs or oregano, or salt? What's that one thing? And then you get it just right. And then, it just tastes great and it produces the great vegetation that you want, right? It's like, it's almost like there is that artistic aspect to it, that brings it beyond just the science, that you're creating the right balance, not just saying you want this number to be 50 and this number to be between 60 and 65.
Exactly. And, I don't test everything all the time, although we will do that for new planting beds. Like right now, we're preparing new areas in the forest for certain herbs that thrive there. So we will do a certain amount of testing, just to get things going. But then after things are going, they pretty much take care of themselves. And you kind of open the door to my favorite topic, which is that artistic side. And as a farmer, if you've done it long enough, you really don't need that much external instrumentation or testing to just know which way the wind's blowing. Your plants
Right.
literally let you know. And there is a communication on a whole different level. And, cooking's also one of my favorite things, being an Italian. So people always come over to our house and say, "Oh, give me your recipe." And I say, I don't have a recipe. I just do it. And so, yeah, farming's a little bit of the same thing.
Right, right. But so now, so as not to sound too intimidating, like if you're a beginner, like how can you, maybe without any instrumentation at all, how can you, guarantee that you can grow some decent food, like just in a simple way? Like, would you say raised beds? Would that be the way to start if you're doing this for the first time?
Yeah, especially if you're in a situation where you can't till the land, you have a back deck or a patio, that's a brilliant way to do it. And, my wife is a master gardener, and, she writes articles for papers up here in the Northwest. And she wrote one article a year ago called "There's No Such Thing as a Black Thumb." And it's really true. Gardening, it's kind of like surfing. It's about just going out there, having fun, getting your feet wet. And there's no such thing as a bad gardener or a bad surfer as long as you're having fun. And there is this exchange again between yourself and the plants. There's a resonance, and there's something that goes far beyond just the soil, the chemicals, and what you read in gardening books. But that resonance that happens between the grower and the plants is remarkable. And I'm sure you're aware of a lot of studies that show when plants are subjected to say classical music, or when they're just
Right,
surrounded by people that are constantly projecting double plus positive thoughts, and emotions, that they thrive on that. So I would say anybody that wants to get started, just have fun with it. It's a new way of exploring not only how to feed yourself and grow something, but to get real connected on other levels, no matter where you live.
right. Well, I had the experience this summer of, for the first time ever, I tried to grow some food. And I really did not know what I'm doing. And I didn't put a lot of work into researching it or asking for advice. But I did feel that harmony that you're talking about, like that I was giving an intention to the plants. And I did spend time, like I did put in a small raised bed and I spent time mixing compost in with the soil and putting, stone dust in for minerals and getting it ready. And what happened was that I was so busy that I hardly paid any attention to it the whole summer. I did keep up with making sure, it was watered, but that's really about it. And some of the plant, I didn't germinate the seeds properly or anything like that. So it's just like wild luck almost of what came up. But there were some plants that just thrived. And this was in a spot with very limited sun, right? And my corn grew well, right, in an area with limited sun. So why did that happen? It was like I needed to demonstrate, to myself that I could grow something, because in the future I want to move toward that. And so there was something about how I exchanged that energy, with the garden, that, and especially this cucumber plant, it just grew monstrously large. And when a friend later came over who was a farmer, said, I can't believe it's grown like that in that area. Right, but it gave me, so many cucumbers I couldn't keep up with it.
And it's a great experience. You see that not only does nature give back a thousandfold, but it's more than forgiving.
Yes.
And it also shows us that we are not separate from nature. There is that quality of resonance, which is the way we communicate with all life. In our physical bodies, the whole purpose of the body, the meridian systems, and so forth, are to give us constant feedback with our external environment, so that we're resonating in unison. And it's the same thing with farming.
Yeah, it's really amazing. So, Bear, I wanted to ask you more about energy, because you had mentioned in the beginning, talking a little bit about solar, and that you were looking into that there were drawbacks from that, and also, thinking about, well, what exactly do you need, the energy for? Like, are you, using it just to do these kind of interviews, right? To get the internet and that kind of thing, or like in a practical sense, like what kind of energy do you really need? Do you need engines? Do you need electricity? Like how do you power everything, and what are the essentials?
Yeah, we use a fair amount of energy. Our footprint is pretty light. Even if we're on the grid, we probably use less than an average, household in the suburbs somewhere. But we still, need it. For instance, we have a river pump, and that requires energy. And so, we just put up a new, doubled our solar system here with new panels, and upgraded our inverters and so forth. So that allows us to run power tools. It allows us to, pump water out of the river. It allows us to have the lights on in the house. I'm talking to you now over a satellite modem, and it allows us to power that up so that we can communicate and run our business, even though we're out in the backwoods.
Right.
So, those are all the things. Just think of everything that you use, in your household. We do pretty much the same, only extra, in that we do have to pump water, do things like that. I have to do a lot of carpentry, and things like that, just because, you have to pretty much make do with everything when you live
Right.
like we do. So, that requires power tools too.
So what about what else do you have to, because you probably can't meet 100% of your needs with solar, right?
So we have a diesel generator. And if we go through extended rain periods, which are not unusual for where we live, because we live in a rainforest, basically, it's we have more of a. It's not like further northwest where it's just kind of drizzly and gray all the time. We have a very defined monsoon season, where we can get up to almost 200 inches of rain in a single season, if you can fathom that. That's more than you get in the Amazon rainforest. And like I was out tending to my chickens this morning, and it was just completely downpouring. But we're kind of used to just being wet all the time. But then come late spring, all of a sudden the switch is flipped, and you just have this gorgeous weather for the next 6 months. So that's kind of our reality here. And at that time, we have to pump more river water and so forth. But yeah, the water is one of the reasons why we're here, though, because while the rest of California is having droughts and other places in the world, we have plenty of water. And if you just drive up the canyon in our place, you see water squirting out, of every rock and down the canyons. You'll sometimes on the way up to our house count, 50 waterfalls. Um,
Wow.
yeah. So, but yeah, the thing is when you live off grid, and even though we have a very sophisticated system, you become more aware of your energy use. If we're out visiting somebody in civilization, we just are constantly walking, just kind of automatic. We don't even think about it, turning the light switches off. And, we're just very aware of how much
Right.
energy we use. I don't buy into the concept that there's, that we're limited or that nature does not provide abundantly. We're not coming at it from a place of lack, but you do become conscious of just the energy you use. And that's been a very, fundamental precept of a lot of spiritual practices for eons, and that you just take what you need and no more.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, living the way that you are probably lends itself to just being more conscious of, the effect of all of your activities, right? Because you have a much closer relationship with the land and with the nature, right? Whereas, living in completely artificial environments and being out of touch, you don't look at the impact that you have, because it's sort of removed from you, that it's harder to see. But I'm sure you're much more conscious of it in living that way.
By necessity, you have to be. And another great thing of being off grid and remote, we're the closest power line or cell tower is probably, you know, 30, 40 miles away. And so you don't have that inundation of those overlays of electricity. And when you're out in away from that long enough, I don't know how to describe it. It just opens up your perception a little bit more so that you're more conscious of all the life forms around you, how to interact with them. And, I think it requires a lot more respect all the way around. And you can appreciate that more when you're just not in it all the time.
Hmm. Yeah, I see what you mean. So, what other kind of systems do you have to set up to, keep things running? Like, in other words, like, what do you do with sewage waste and things like that, or other practical aspects?
Right now, we've been on this farm for 4 years, and our last one we developed over a 10-year period. And it was wonderful. People came from all over just to do walkthroughs. It was considered a destination, and it was in a remote area too. We're even more remote now, and we moved here because we outgrew the space that we were in the last one. So sorry. So I don't want to get too much off on a tangent. So your question was,
Yeah, I was just asking about like other aspects. Like we talked a little bit about energy,
oh,
we
okay.
talked about food production, but what are the other important things to living off grid?
Yeah. So what we have to provide irrigation to our plants. We just upgraded our water system, got a couple more holding tanks, a pressure tank, so we would have enough pressure to run the irrigation lines. Again, I'm describing, living off grid if you're a farmer, but
Right,
these are all the things that we have to provide
right.
for.
But you would
And then we
still,
had to run.
even if you were just growing your own food, right? You'd still need to have water source so that you could irrigate, right, your planting beds.
Right, right.
Right.
And
So,
we
and
have
you're drawing from the river water, but then you said you also have, I'm not sure if you have wells dug for the springs, but you said you have water from springs as well.
Yeah, we do that, and all we have to do is go up on the hillside here and shove a pipe into one of the hillsides, and water just starts pouring out.
Wow.
And
That's
then you
amazing.
can make connections to that two holding tanks, and you just do it in an elevation so gravity fills up your tanks. We have that going. We have
And what do
another.
can you drink that water directly or do you
Oh,
filter it?
absolutely.
You do, the
No,
spring
it's
water where you are.
It comes right out of pure bedrock for miles, and not only is it clean, and it's been tested. I'm really not concerned about testing, but other people in the area have tested all the waters around here, and it's pristine. The
Right.
the other thing that's great about it is it goes through natural vortex motions, which structures the water in a very beneficial way that makes it available to your body. You asked about sewage. That's a big thing, of course. Presently, we're on a septic system, and we're getting off of that because it's just really not a good idea to pump your stuff in the ground. But that was set up when we got here.
Right.
um,
That's very common for
and
rural properties.
yeah, so we're putting in a whole composting system, which is the next level of composting, which is not the old thing where you have to throw hay in the toilet every time you go. It's actually,
But that does
very
work
nice.
though, you know,
It
right?
works. It
Someone
works
loves
great.
to pay, yeah.
So the unit that we're installing, has water flush, and then it goes into a central tank, and then it goes through several chambers. By the time it comes out the back end, it's just pure odorless, and just a fraction of just a small amount of ash that's left from the whole thing. So I
Well,
think
can
that's
you
a
use
much more
that to
intelligent design.
fertilize your garden at the end?
You can. I probably won't be doing that because we do produce herbs for a lot of our products, so it
Sure.
may not be a good selling point. So yeah,
No, but you could,
we'll
but like my
good.
understanding is if you do that, you're actually giving information back to the soil and about your body's status and what it needs, and that if you grow your own food, right, with that kind of feedback system, that the food will actually produce the right nutrition for you. Do you think, is there any
Yeah,
to that?
yeah, there could be truth to that. I think there's a better way to do it, and it is what we do for our own food production. When we're out there preparing our plant beds for the food we're actually going to be eating, I have the seeds in my mouth,
Oh, really?
maybe for a couple hours.
Oh, no
And
way.
so they're getting impregnated with the DNA from my saliva.
Wow, that's a powerful sounding technique. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, and then you plant them, and they're literally going to become medicine for your body that way. So
Wow.
rather than trying to do that with the waste products from your body, I would rather do it with more the alive enzymes and DNA from my body on the other end.
Wow, that's really interesting. I can't wait to try that next planting season.
Oh,
What
I would definitely advise people to do that.
and for a couple of hours.
I People say 20 minutes is fine, but we're out there digging around and the time goes, so what the heck?
So you have like a mouthful of seeds and you spit one at a time
Yeah,
and plant it?
exactly.
That's awesome. It's right out of
Something
like
like
an
that.
Elmer Fudd cartoon. That's great.
Yeah. A little while ago, you mentioned, when we're talking about electricity, and this is very important, we're talking about the soil electricity, which we do, we accommodate with our testing. But there's other ley lines I think you might have been alluding to that are prominent. So we use principles of biogeometry and radiesthesia to really, I've got all the ley lines on our land, and there's different kinds of electrical grids that are just inherent in the earth itself. And all indigenous cultures, for instance, knew that, well, you don't put your teepee on this place over here because that's where the lines are crossing. It may not be the best thing for you.
Right.
So, we do that with everything here on the farm. If we're planting, not only do we make sure it's in a more favorable place relative to those grid lines, but also so that uh, those grid lines are going to be used favorably to produce, exactly what you want, and instead of working against you.
Right.
So
So
that's very important.
did you have a like a consultant come in and map your property, or is that something that you have
No, I do it.
Oh, so can you tell us how you go about doing that? Or is it
Sure.
maybe it's not so simple, but maybe just a broad overview?
It is simple, but there's a lot to it, and it requires a lot of experience in just understanding the principles. So you know you're not just doing woo-woo stuff. This is real. It's not like the old-fashioned dowsers, where certain gifted people can just use a hickory switch or something, and get feedback from that. That's a very real phenomena. But biogeometry instruments and other instruments within the field of radiesthesia and dual impedance antennas that were created by Austrian physicists for engineering purposes and so forth. Those create angulations, depending where you set them, to create waveforms that will ping off of similar waveforms so that what's there. So you have to know ahead of a time how those things work, the geometry of certain waveforms that you want to test, and then be able to set your instruments. The thing that throws a lot of people, and this is is the fact that it really integrates the practitioner, whether using this for agriculture, engineering, or medicine. It puts the practitioner back in the equation, because it's not an electronic instrument that is going to be using dirty electricity in the first place to try to measure
Right? It's not a
more
solid
of those
state
refined
magnetometer.
stratas. Yeah. So, but it requires a practitioner that is not only intellectually understanding what they're doing and how to use the instruments, but to also be attuned with the instrument itself, so that there's a resonance between the instrument, the practitioner, and whatever you're trying to test. Of course, contemporary science would poo poo that, because they'd say, oh, well, there's going to be operator bias. But then with these same principles, we can understand why there's no possibility of not having operator bias, even in double blind studies.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a good point. There's a lot of a lot of problems with the way science is approached, certainly. But you could test reproducibility with this technique, right? You could have separate people, even with different instrumentation, look for the same kind of elements in a specified area and see if they get similar results.
Exactly. And that's going on as we speak. And the founder of biogeometry, who's an Egyptian engineer, who is also, behind graduate programs in major universities elsewhere in the world, where engineers and people learn this kind of thing. But they've also been commissioned to, places like the Swiss government, who go into entire communities and, use this technology in order to protect them from 5G and Wi-Fi and all that sort of thing, so that they can have the convenience of these technologies, but not have the bad side effects. So
Right.
with the same principles, just like if you're trying to grow healthy plants, you can also create in a particular area an abundance of certain waveforms that are what's abundant and natural in an untampered ecosystem, and just have that, even though you're using these technologies, and then your body is uh, you know getting a big favor in the process.
Well, that's interesting. So that, it does explain how technology could actually be used in a way compatible, right, with the natural order of things, rather than, in an exploitative fashion as it's often utilized in the current time.
Right. Yeah. And when you're looking at medicine or agriculture, you, if you really want to get to another level of refinement and success, you have to understand the different stratas of electricity that are ever present. And the only way you can test this qualitative side of electricity is what these kinds of instruments and this kind of understanding. And it's the only way we're going to really get over this awkward adolescent stage that we're in, and move on to all the things that will provide the solutions for everything that we seek.
That's right. That's right. It's like, this is an infancy stage, right, of this kind of new era of truthful science, or maybe there's a better word for it, but there's this huge opportunity for people to see things in a different light, one that is much more compatible with nature, right? And then will lead to much better outcomes, in every respect, right? And that's what it seems like your entire path, right, has really been to demonstrate the possibility of that for everyone else to see.
Uh, right. And, it's important to understand too that these technologies are not new. They've been around for centuries. And there's ample archaeological evidence and other scientific investigative endeavors that are proving that people centuries ago were using this exact understanding. And a lot of the instruments that I use within radiesthesia and biogeometry, uh, not only, reproduce exact results from practitioner to practitioner, but they were used largely in other civilizations that have, this information just hasn't got to the history books. Let's just say that.
Right, and there's so many parallels to health as well, right? With old technologies that didn't get into the history books, and I think that's a perfect segue to talk about another area, and maybe this is where some of the herbal medicines that you're growing will end up. And what I'm referring to here is the practice of spagyric medicine, right? And
Yeah.
spagyrics is the essentially the medicinal branch of alchemy, right? And people may be more familiar with that term, but not spagyrics. But what alchemy really has to do is breaking things down into their constituent elements and then recombining them to create something new or transform them into right, something different. Right. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about how that works with medicines?
Sure. Well, I have a chemistry lab. And all I do in my chemistry lab, to make tinctures and things, is to fabricate operations that mimic natural processes in the body and exactly what nature does outside of ourselves. And you're using the same principles, only with laboratory equipment, speeding up the process. So something that might take a long time in nature, maybe even years, you can speed up the timetable in order to create the elements that you want in a certain tincture. It's also interesting that the same principles we use in a spagyric lab require the same understanding that I'm talking about with radiesthesia, biogeometry, because you can't take the practitioner out of it. A lot of people freak out when they hear the word alchemy. They say, oh, that's witchcraft or something.
Right.
But in reality, witchcraft is looking at both sides of the equation, but then occulting part of it to use it for sinister purposes. Whereas, original alchemy was using both sides, the quantitative and the qualitative measurement side of things, and the application of those findings, so that you have a complete duplication of what nature does in the first place. What we've done with more what we think of as conventional science is we just look at the quantitative side only. So it is not only possible to measure the qualitative side of nature, but also do that in a way where it is duplicatable and reproducible from practitioner to practitioner. So when I'm doing a chemical process in my lab and I set up my glassware and whatever I'm trying to achieve, whether I'm just doing a simple distillation or calcination or some other process, you really take great efforts to, number one, I go in with my biogeometry equipment and set up the lab in a certain way so it has an abundance of the qualities that you want in your tinctures. So it would be bringing in those pristine qualities that exist in nature, and without any outside effect or requalification. So the whole lab is set up that way in the first place. And then you go through a little process with yourself, and using the same instruments, you can go through your entire personal energy system get everything in the right place, because you're going to be interacting with this process and you don't want any of your stuff going into those tinctures. So it requires a whole different mindset, and also a responsibility that I think a lot of people really don't account for. When you're putting something out to the public, for instance, you want to make sure it's pure and free from your own issues.
Yeah.
And there are ways to accommodate that. So now the laboratory process is accommodating for that. And it's going to elevate, the end product greatly. And like you say, spagyricism is, when we relate it just to plant medicine only, is about taking all the components apart, purifying them and recombining them and into an elevated whole. But original spagyricism really wasn't about making plant tinctures. That's kind of a lower level of it. And I do that. And it's good because it makes good medicine. When you make your own spagyrics, it's going to have a phenomenal effect on your own body on many levels. When an experienced spagyricist makes them for other people, it's going to have a very strong, effective uh, um, action on more their physical body, which is good because that's what most people are after. And it's also going to work on different levels, but not as much as when you make your own spagyrics. So the whole reason for the spagyric process, where you're using it for plant preparations, mineral preparations, is, a spiritual practice really for the chemist. And that's what the whole science was about initially, is to attune the chemists into those different levels of themselves and go through a spiritual evolution. But if you're making plant medicines, it's still going to have great repercussions for your customers that might, use your plant medicines.
Right, right. Wow, that's really fascinating. And I imagine you could conceptualize this, some of this as being like through the water, right? Because, right, we know that water can capture information and then convey it, where it can be stored by other physical medium, right? Or converted into electromagnetic energy, uh, right? And various other things. And so perhaps like this is the medium by which your intentions or your baggage or your toxicity, right, if the case may be, can impart themselves and imprint onto the plant material that you're using to make the medicine.
Yeah. And what you described is exactly what homeopathy is all about. It's
Right.
about downloading frequencies into a liquid medium that then, can be used by another individual. There is a whole more of a quantitative side to it as well. For instance, when you're preparing any particular plant or mycelium for a tincture or for a spagyric, you have to understand the chemical elements in there. And so it's really important to have a good integrative understanding of what Western science has contributed greatly to the whole process. If you have certain polysaccharides, for instance, in a mycelium that are more water soluble, you want to make sure you do a process with the water extraction first, and then, maybe do an alcohol extraction secondary in order to, get those elements that aren't water soluble. So it's good to know a little bit about chemistry as well. And then the other thing is that, when you're using alcohol, I like to make alcohol from the actual plant I'm extracting. So, for instance, we just did a batch of our Jiao Gulan out here. And so, what I'm doing this winter is I'm making a wine out of the Jiao Gulan. And the Jiao Gulan, which is a medicinal herb from southern China and Thailand, um, or any herb. We do the same thing with ashwagandha and all the other herbs we do. So we make a wine out of it. So you get the alcohol content up to, a typical wine level, maybe 9 to 12%.
Mhm.
And then you take that, say maybe you have 5 gallons of that, you're going to put it through several distillation processes. and raise the alcohol content, you might end up with a gallon out of the original 5 gallons of wine. But now that is the spirit
Yes.
of that plant. And now you use that to extract the macerate of the jiaogulan in this case in order to extract it. Now you're getting more the essence out of that plant, which is kind of more the soul signature of that particular plant. And so now you're using the spirits, and a lot of these words, from old days, we still use, we say
Yes.
spirits, wine and
Oh yeah.
spirits.
Every
Well,
bottle of liquor says, right, distilled spirits of whatever.
yeah. And that is language that's been carried over from the old days of alchemy. And so now you take the spent plant matter and then you don't throw it away, even though you've extracted what, the chemical
Right.
constituents that you want out of it or the essence. And now you calcinate that and reduce it to an ash, which is kind of like an alkaline ash. And then you reintroduce that back into it. So you have the spirit, the essence, and the body of the plant. And it's on a nutritional level, it's going to work phenomenal because you've got all those minerals and things that are innate to that plant species that you take in a spagyric tincture. There's a lot of spagyric tinctures out there that claim spagyricism, but they don't go through the whole first step, which is distilling the spirits from the plant in the first place. And the reason why, and I understand, is it just takes time and it's not economically feasible.
Right.
We're a small operation and we can do whatever the heck we want. So we
Right.
do
So
it.
you need generally a lot of material to do that initial fermentation, right? And some material yields very low amounts of alcohol compared to others, right? Depending on the sugar content.
Precisely.
And so
Which is
yeah,
why we keep cultivating new areas around here.
right. And so that's why a lot of people will just use cane sugar distilled spirits, right?
Mhm.
Instead of distilling, the material they're making the medicine from. So do you
Mhm.
do you think you can still have a reasonable medicine using the spirits from a different plant, or do you think that completely ruins the benefits?
Well, it depends what you're trying to achieve. You can have a remarkable tincture. There's a place up here in Southern Oregon that sells organic alcohol, and they do a great job. You can get organic, 190 proof from cane, from grapes, just about anything you want. And it's a good medium to use. It's clean, and you will get more of those chemical constituents. It will help people in a lot of ways. It's just not going to be able to ping on all those other levels of reality. It's just going to ping on one level.
Right, I see.
And when I say ping, I mean resonate, those qualities into your own resonant fields.
Right. And the properties of the medicine themselves comes from the plant, like the particular plant, correct?
Mhm.
So like for example,
And
like what would the healing properties related to ashwagandhas be, since you mentioned that one?
well, ashwagandha, we classify a lot of plants as adaptogens these days, which is a loose term for something that will help you combat stress, help your body accommodate to all the stressors that we face these days. And ashwagandha is for sure in that category, justifiably. So it's going to, really help, all of your endocrine functions that are under assault these days, your adrenal systems and things to regenerating. It's really going to help refill the fuel tanks. It also is remarkable for both men and women as far as their reproductive health. So that's another good little quality from it. But then ashwagandha or any other herb has those other levels of reality that are going to work on more the we'll just, for lack of a better term, call the psycho-spiritual. And then that's what, happens when you do the complete spagyric process. If you go into ancient systems like Ayurvedic or even Chinese medicine, We understand there are different energetic categories, and they just do that for convenience. And there's, of course, a lot of overlap. But when you look at a plant, like we'll look at Jiaogulan again, if it's a vine, it's constantly growing upwards. It's very airy. It's very really trying to interact with the upper atmosphere. And in terms of Ayurvedic dosha, we'd maybe say, oh, that has Veda qualities. And when you farm, you have your three doshas,
Right.
kapha,
The
pitta,
Kaufman.
and yeah. So anyway, when I look at plant medicine, I understand the chemical part of it, but I'm more interested in the personality of the plant. And the best way to understand the personality of a plant is to grow it for a while. So when I look at Jiao Gulan and I look at, maybe somebody who's asking, what should I take? I'm going to look at something that's compatible with their personality or their dosha. And so now you're getting into another whole level of plant medicine that supersedes just more that reductionist look at the end
Right. Pharmaceutical.
components that yeah, which has a whole basis in reality, not demeaning that at all, but it's just a tiny part of it.
Right. Well, like in my, in my personal life, in my family, and then I've talked about with a lot of clients about using cilantro tinctures, right? And principally because of the heavy metal chelation properties. And some people have had some very good results, especially when it's been spagyrically prepared medication. But I don't know of anyone who's actually done it themselves or who necessarily has related to the higher properties of that. But I'd like to definitely experience that. I plan to grow some actually this season. Um, but do you have anything to add about that particular herb?
No, cilantro is wonderful, and I've used it for years and using concentrates. And that's when I get into the more the pure physicality where, we'll do different analysis and find out they're inundated with heavy metals. And so we put cilantro in with other formulations, and it is very effective in chelating out heavy metals. Another way to think of this is, you know, everything is a continuum. So, best example, you look at a pot of boiling water and you see the liquid medium, the solid state, you see the steam, and then it seemingly disappears into the atmosphere, but we have no trouble believing that it's still there. It just goes beyond, the way our sight is calibrated. So the same thing with a plant, the same thing with our body. So if you take a spagyric form of cilantro, it's going to be more readily available for all of those different levels of the continuum. And in fact, the continuum that we think that part of the continuum that we think we can't see is actually the most important part because that's what eventually condenses down into materiality in the first place. So if you can, I like to think of working a little bit more upstream these days, and you have better effects down on the ground that way too. But a spagyric remedy is accommodating the full spectrum of that entire continuum. So cilantro is going to accommodate the levels of maybe our psyche, our emotional body, the mental plane, and different levels that then condense down into the reasons why our body might hold on to toxic metals in the first place.
Right.
You and I might be exposed to the same toxins, and maybe I have a problem and you don't have a problem with it. It's because of many levels of my being that are actually holding on to that stuff. So if you have a full plant medicine that's working on the entire continuum, you're going to have much better success, I believe, and get the reasons why it's happening in the first place. Because our body is designed to just have all that stuff move through us.
Right, right. No, but that makes so much sense because we always do exhibit these individual differences, right? Even if we're exposed to a toxic material, we're different. If we have poor nutrition, if we're under the same stress, we have different vulnerabilities and respond differently, right? There's all these individual differences. Why children growing up with the same parents turn out different, right? In many
Mm-hmm.
respects. So here we can like have a way, really, you're saying basically to address those individual differences at a meta level, like beyond the obvious, common pathway that we see, which is, okay, like there's a boil on the skin, right? But we don't see what really, caused that, because everybody, who ate the fish dinner at Rosie's house last week didn't get a boil, but you did, right? So what made that happen to you, and then we can bring about a resolution to that. And that is really so similar to what I was just been talking about with German New Medicine, with a couple of other professionals, talking about the psychological aspects of that. And so you can address them through the Spagyric approach, but you can, there's always more than one way, right, to heal in nature. And so it's great to have these kind of two different parallel approaches. And then it reminds me also of like biofield tuning, which is, talking about the acoustic wave field around us and using that as another approach to get at some of these entanglements on a higher metal level. So, it's really amazing to see this sort of harmony in all these different theories and paradigms.
Yeah, I'm convinced that's the future of medicine, the future of agriculture, the future of engineering will be to work on that level almost exclusively, because then you're working on the primal creative, with the primal creative forces in the first place. And you mentioned German New Medicine. Dr. Hammer, who is the innovator of that, did a brilliant job of drawing the nexus between the psyche and triggering electrical events by way of the central nervous system, and then producing a biological event in order to heal us. And towards the end of his life, he was going into that area of resonance and you working with musicologists and people to intervene on that level. And I'm a big fan of German New Medicine. I've done it for years. But it's one level of understanding. So when you get into these other principles that Dr. Hammer himself was going to towards the end of his life, things that Dr. Karim in Egypt is doing with biogeometry and working with governments and learning institutions around the world, that really explains the next level of how those forces within the psyche, which are electrical vectors, actually produce the triggering event in the central nervous system that Dr. Hammer brilliantly not only revealed, but then proved beyond any of a shadow of a doubt that that's the way it works, with conventional CAT scans and so forth. So when you understand now that next level, which he was understanding, which was why he was going into resonance therapy, not only are you able to introduce that, into a more full integrated system, but now you can also join forces with other people that have already perfected instrumentation techniques and verified what they're doing. And so we live in a marvelous time, and I think the only problem we have is that we have one impediment only, and that's the media.
That's right. Yeah, that you're absolutely right about that, because I was speaking with someone just recently, and we were talking about, how would things be so different if just for 7 days, right, all of the media got shut down, right? All TV, internet, phones, just for 7 days, and people would, first go perhaps be in a little bit of shock and panic, but they would get over that quickly, and then they would, learn all of these new things that would, lead to no longer needing for any of those other things, or a way to use technology only in a way that is, increases our efficiency or supplements something, but not as, like a place to live your life.
Yeah, and we would just naturally fall back to the classical system of logic, which is just observe and make up your own damn mind.
It's too simple. It's too simple for people, Bear. But
I
yeah,
think
you're right.
so.
That's exactly what I need. We call it Zeteticism, but just open your eyes, take a look, see what's around you, and then from that, deduce what's going on. And that's really all it takes to get everything at least 98% correct.
I agree.
Well,
Absolutely.
Bear, this has been a real treat again, speaking with you. I always learn so much. Will you tell people anything that interesting you have coming up, or where they can find more of your work?
Well, we're at alphavedic.com. That's ALFAVEDIC.com. And we're creating a platform there, and this place where I live here is the Agricultural Foundation, because we believe, it's just our philosophy, that all enterprises should have an agricultural base to just ground you in and provide for your own needs. And the website is under development, but there's a lot of good information there that can tell you, what we're up to. And the other thing we're doing is joining forces with great folks like yourself. And my partner Mike and my son Bryden, they can tell people more about some of the other projects that I know you're involved with, like this summit that's coming up. I think you and I are going to share a little panel there talking about certain things. And that's the most delightful thing that that I'm getting out of this, is we're just meeting wonderful people. All of them are kindred spirits. We all have the commonality of just wanting a happy place for us to all inhabit, and there's no reason why that shouldn't be happening right now.
That's absolutely correct, Bear. And it has been that has been. There's always a silver lining, right? And obviously, we're in a world-changing time, and it's a very challenging time right now. But for me, the two silver linings is one, having my kids now come home so that I can, really raise them myself instead of sending them off to strangers at the school. And then two was just networking and meeting such a rich group of people, who've done so much work and have amassed so much knowledge and are so willing to collaborate, that we do have this, real network now. And it's like together we can really help propel this new era forward, right? Where we are returning back to our natural roots and relearning how to cooperate and live in real communities again. Not without being just told what to do or infantilized and taken care of by the authorities. So, and let me also say that you and Mike Winter, let me give a shout out to him. Have a really great show that I've been on a couple of times, but it's actually I watch you guys regularly, and I learned a lot from you before I ever did any interviews. And this week, I think you had Cal Washington on, so I'm really excited to see that. Cal is a great guy, and he has some really novel legal strategies to help deal with some of the things that are materializing now. So please check that out, and remember to find me on andrewkaufmanmd.com, and please sign up for my newsletter so you'll be in the loop about programs like this and with excellent guests. So thanks again, Bear, and we will see you next time.